In the first half of the 1970s, East Africa stood on an uneasy foundation of alliances, suspicion, espionage, and wounded pride. By 1975, Kenya and Uganda were no longer two neighboring states bound by shared trade routes and colonial history. They were two rival regimes divided by psychology, personal ego, and an emerging Cold War proxy chessboard. And at the center of the storm was one man whose unpredictable mind could swing from charm to bloodshed in seconds: Field Marshal Alhaji Dr. Idi Amin Dada. The story of the July 9th, 1975 emergency landing of Amin's private jet in Nairobi cannot be understood as a single aviation incident. It was the product of years of slow diplomatic decay, humiliation layered on humiliation, fear layered on paranoia, and geopolitical anxiety layered on wounded masculinity. Uganda under Amin had become a psychological state of siege. He trusted no one. He saw plots everywhere, and he read betrayal even in ordinary gestures. Long before his plane developed mechanical trouble in Kenyan skies, Amin had already burned the bridge of trust between Kampala and Nairobi. He had insulted President Jomo Kenyatta publicly. He accused Kenya of harboring political enemies and exiled officers. He claimed parts of Western Kenya historically belonged to Uganda. His soldiers repeatedly harassed Kenyan fishermen near the border. The CIA was watching him, Mossad was tracking him. Libya was funding him, and Tanzania was preparing for war against him. Uganda was a volcano wrapped in a presidential uniform. The Kenya-Uganda border in the early 1970s was not merely a crossing line. It was a psychological front line. Kenyan intelligence had files thick with reports of disappearances, torture, suspicious cross-border deployments, and the quiet liquidation of Ugandans seen as ideological traitors. Refugees began slipping across Lake Victoria into Kenya at night, bringing stories of mass graves, shot priests, disappeared mayors, ghost prisons, and soldiers who killed with laughter in their throats. Kenya's police and special branch listened, and Nairobi quietly concluded that Uganda's president was no longer a leader. He was a storm. By 1972, Amin's paranoia had already started bleeding beyond his borders. He insulted Tanzania, insulted Britain, insulted Israel, and then cozied up with Gaddafi. Kenya watched all this with a stiff diplomatic smile, but behind the smile, the state was tightening the bolts. Kenyan intelligence began monitoring every Ugandan officer who entered their territory. Intercepts increased. Border patrols intensified. Secret memos circulated warning that Amin might try to destabilize Kenya just to prove dominance over the region. That mistrust only deepened when Amin publicly threatened to annex parts of Kenya's Rift Valley and Nyanza, claiming they were once part of Greater Uganda. For Kenyatta, already aging, already guarding his legacy fiercely, that was a direct strike at national dignity. Behind closed doors, angry cabinet discussions flared. Kenya stopped trusting him completely. Amin, in turn, sensed this shift. And because he was a man who read loyalty in fear and hostility in hesitation, Kenya's caution became, in his mind, a prelude to assassination. By early 1975, internal purges in Kampala had reached fever pitch. Cabinet ministers disappeared. Judges vanished. Foreign diplomats whispered of midnight trucks that carried prisoners to nowhere. The Masaka mayor disappeared under unknown circumstances, but everyone knew circumstances in Amin's Uganda always bled. A prominent businessman named Kuku Karumba, part of the Uganda Army's elite circle, was gone too, swallowed by the machinery of absolute power paranoia. Priests were crushed under tanks during an Air Force mutiny crackdown. Fear was not the byproduct of Amin's rule, it was the system. And all of this was known in Nairobi. So when, on July 9th, 1975, Idi Amin's Commodore twin-engine presidential jet developed mechanical trouble while flying back from Addis Ababa, and the pilot was forced to request an emergency landing in Nairobi. The Kenyan government faced an unexpected geopolitical dilemma dropped straight from the sky. For an ordinary president, this would have been a routine aviation matter. But Idi Amin was not an ordinary president. He was a man whose shadow was heavier than his footsteps. And Nairobi was not just a city. It was territory he believed was hostile to him. The Kenyan government, stunned and skeptical, allowed the emergency landing. But behind the decision was a nervous calculation. If they denied landing rights and he crashed, they would be blamed for killing a sitting head of state. If they granted it and anything happened to him on Kenyan soil, they would be blamed too. By Kampala, by Libya, by the Organization of African Unity, perhaps even by the Arab League. So they let him land, but under intense, quiet surveillance. The moment the wheels of Amin's jet touched Nairobi's runway, Kenyan intelligence officers were already whispering, "What if this is not mechanical failure? What if this is staged? What if this is bait?" Because Amin did not travel with simplicity. He traveled with theater. Every appearance was a statement. Every crisis was a stage. The Kenyan government, hoping to avoid entanglement, offered him a Kenya police light aircraft to complete his journey to Kampala. That is where the psychological curtain lifted. And Amin's deepest fear surfaced. He refused, flatly, coldly, suspiciously. To him, stepping into a Kenyan plane was like stepping into a coffin built by foreign hands. His eyes did not see transport. They saw a trapdoor disguised as courtesy. He feared his enemies had finally found the perfect method, an aviation accident that would look clean, deniable, elegant. No bullets, no coup, just a headline. Ugandan leader dies in plane crash after Kenya help. So he stalled, he postured. He probed, he demanded assurances, not from protocol officers, not from aviation engineers, not from Kenyatta, from Moi. Because Moi was not just vice president, he was the future. Amin sensed political succession before the Kenyan elite themselves spoke it aloud. And if he placed his body inside a Kenyan aircraft, he wanted someone inside who could not afford to die, someone whose death would be as unacceptable to Kenya as his own. Moi boarding the plane would become a guarantee of survival, an insurance policy written in living breath. And that is why July 9th, 1975 was not really about a plane. It was about trust forced into a hostage situation. Amin would only fly if Moi flew with him, a head of state holding the second in command of another nation as a kind of political collateral, not a formal hostage, but psychological leverage. Moi accepted, reluctantly but strategically. That flight became a silent diplomatic theater, a wordless negotiation in the sky between two men, one afraid of being killed, the other afraid of being dragged into a war of reputations. Kenya would later pretend this was routine courtesy. It wasn't. It was the closest the two countries ever came to the kind of invisible crisis historians rarely see, because it left no treaty, no gunshot, no formal scandal, only a flight, a face-to-face journey, and an unspoken admission. Amin believed Kenya could kill him, and Kenya understood that he would kill their diplomacy if he died there. Moi's presence on that plane was not generosity. It was calculation. And it worked.